witches, I'm back with the YouTube Pagan Challenge, and the question, it was actually from last week I think, was what is your top 10 pagan books? So I have a 10 books here. A lot of them are old favorites, not necessarily new favorites, but they're classics. They're ones that had huge influences on me, and so I'm gonna talk to them. You may like some of these books, you may hate some of these books, and that's okay. This is just my top 10 for now in this moment, and yeah, let's get started. So the first one I'm gonna talk about is actually not really a pagan book, but it is a classic, and I think it's a classic for women in general, but it is Women Who Run with the Wolves by Clarissa Pinkola Estes, PhD. And so this book goes through a lot of different old sort of fairy tales, but it kind of tries to go back to the original. And it talks about what that means on sort of a psychological level. And the reason I include this in the pagan thing is because it really goes into things about archetypes and taking care of ourselves as women and our connection with the divine feminine. And this was a book that I found during a time in my life that was really difficult. And this book really helped me to think about things differently. And it's one of those classics you can go back and read to over and over again. And I really love this book and highly recommend it, even if you're not pagan, just to women in general. I think it's a very healing book. It's definitely a book that can help you through a lot of things. So I highly recommend this particular book. The next book on my list is The Circle Within, Creating a Wiccan Spiritual Tradition by Diane Sylvan. It's not a super huge book, but it is a really great book at sort of developing how to develop your own personal practice, your own day-to-day personal practice in your life. You know, everything from like prayers and devotion rituals to how you act in the world. And so I think it's a very practical, down-to-earth kind of book that really gets you to think, and it doesn't sort of like what's the word I'm looking for? It doesn't like hold your hand and say you should do A, B, C, D. It gets you to really think about what you want to do for your personal practice. It has, at the end, it says 3 things to think on, and it gives you 3 things to think about. So it, at the end of each little chapter, so it covers things like stepping into the circle, in search of your relationship, mystery, relationship with deity, ethics and your standard of behavior, creating sacred space, daily practice, the wheel of the year, and creating personal rituals, prayers, etc. So it gets you to think about what you want to do for your personal practice without, you know, holding your hand and saying do A, B, and C. So I do recommend this book, especially if you're not, you know, a beginner, but maybe you're a little bit past being a beginner. I think this is a good book for sure. The next book was a book that I came across early in my practice. It's called The Power of the Witch, The Earth, the Moon, and the Magical Path of Enlightenment by Laurie Cabot. So it is a classic. It was published, what is this here? I feel like it was published in the 90s, but I could be wrong. Oh, 1989, so a little older than that. And I think this is a great book for beginners, and it also gives you some great, you know, guided meditation tips, so how to get in sort of an altered state in your mind. I just think this is a classic book, and I highly recommend it. The next one I have is a book that I go back to every so often. It's called The 12 Wild Swans by Starhawk. And the way that this book is written is it talks about this story, The 12 Wild Swans, and then it breaks it down into, I think it's 7 chapters. Chapter 5, chapter 6, yeah, chapter 7. 7 chapters that kind of go through different parts of the story. But each chapter has 3 parts. So there's a part if you're a beginner, just talking about developing your spiritual practice. Then there's one for like if you're like, I guess like 2nd degree, sort of talking more about what this means on an inner psychological level. And then the 3rd level is what this means on a political level and how you bring this to the world. So you can, it tells you to kind of read through it like level 1, level 2, level 3. So it's a book you can come back to over and over again. And Starhawk, you know, she's definitely been extremely influential in my practice. And I do, you know, definitely appreciate her reclaiming tradition. I wouldn't say I'm reclaiming, but I do definitely, you know, losing my words. It definitely has been a big influence on me. I really love that she sort of blends the political along with the spiritual and the personal, which I think, you know, these things bleed over each other and they're definitely intertwined, and I really love the way she talks about it. So this is probably my favorite Starhawk book, so I have this on the list. The next book on the list is actually the first Wicca book I ever got, and it's Casting the Circle by Diane Steen, a woman's book of ritual. I was starting to, I guess in my late teens, very early 20s, read things about goddesses and female spirituality, and so I was led to this book, and this book really helped me to develop a spiritual practice. It was one of the very first books I got. I'm pretty sure it was the first book I got. And I still refer back to this book. It's got Sabbath rituals, it's got house blessing rituals in it, and it definitely gave me a really good start. It's definitely a feminist type book, so it's, you know, calling on the goddesses, not so much on the gods, but it is, I think, a very good book as well. This book is also an older book. 1990 is this book. There's a bit of theme here, books from the 90s, right? Back when I started out, we did not have YouTube or the internet or anything. You had to go to the bookstore and hunt down books. The next book is a DJ Conway book, and it is a book called Moon Magic. And the reason I like this book is it gives you kind of ideas for different type of rituals. The way that this book works is it has the 13 lunar months of the year. So it goes through the lunar calendar, and it starts in January with the wolf moon, and it has correspondences, it has recipes, it has crafts. It talks a little bit about myths. She talks about like gods and goddesses you can associate with that time of year. So she has a little short, like kind of, you know, snippets of myths. And then there's rituals. There's different rituals. There's like a new moon ritual, like a crescent moon ritual, full moon, and then dark moon ritual. And there's usually about 5 different rituals that you can pick from. So you can kind of almost like, if you, especially if you're newer, and I got this book when I was newer, it kind of almost gives you like a liturgy to go through, and especially if you're kind of newer and you're not sure where to start, I think this is a kind of a good way to start. I mean, I know not everyone's a fan of DJ Conway, but I think she was one of the authors that made Wicca accessible to a new generation in the 90s, especially a lot of us that were younger. So yeah, so it goes through all of them, and then it even has things like, it has like a winter solstice ritual in here, and it talks about, it's not just, you know, European, they've got stuff for Ganesh and Kali and all that kind of stuff. So I really like this book. A book that I wish I had when I was new and starting out is The Inner Temple of Witchcraft by Christopher Penczak. And really, you can put all of his temple books in here. The Inner Temple and Outer Temple, I really wish I had when I was starting out, because he is so good at explaining and breaking everything down, and really talks about developing your inner practice first before you start to do things like spells and all that, and talks about how magic really comes from within. So I really love this book. I read it a couple of years ago, a year ago, and I just thought I wish I had this book around when I was younger, and I like all of his books. I think he's a very informative type of guy, so very cool. The next book may be a controversial pick for some, but it holds a near and dear place in my heart, and that is To Ride a Silver Broomstick by Sylvan Ravenwolf. Now, a lot of people don't like her, and that's okay. They're free to not like her. This was one of the first books that I got, and it really helped me to develop my practice. So, you know, I started out with Casting the Circle. I think I had another DJ Conway book, and then I had this. So this was like my 3rd book. And I like, though, that she also talks about, you know, things like your ethics and why you're doing this before you start getting into spell work. And, you know, I kind of think that some people don't like her out of a sense of snobbery, I have to say, but also because in the 90s, she really made witchcraft popular and accessible. She wrote in a way that was very accessible, in a way that attracted a lot of younger people, and I think some people didn't really like that. I have no problem with her. I think I've definitely grown past this book, but it was, one of the first books that I got, and I think it was one that really started me to think about things and explore things, and I think it's still a useful jumping off point. Let's look at the date this one was published. And this is the old cover. I love it, the cheesy '90s cover. Love it. 1997, yep. So most of my books are from the 90s here. Maybe a couple from the 2000s, but most of them are from the 90s. And yeah, so this is one of my early faves. Had a big influence on me, so I have to give it some props. The next book that I'm going to show you again is not like the first book. Is not technically like a pagan type book, but it has to be the Harry Potter series. Now, of course, this is not real witchcraft. This is fictional, but I think that Harry Potter in general is a book that you can really, how do I find the words for this? It has a lot of ethics, and I think that this is a book, if you're going to have a sacred book that you live your life by, I think Harry Potter could definitely fall into it. There's actually a really great podcast called Harry Potter and the Sacred Texts, which treats Harry Potter as a sacred book, and examines each chapter and talks about like how we can, put those lessons and ethics into our lives. And I mean, Harry Potter talks a lot about things like friendship and loyalty, love, the power of love, the power of resisting evil, and it gives people a lot of comfort. Fun fact, this is the third most requested book in Guantanamo Bay. After the Bible and the Quran, the Harry Potter series is the most requested. It definitely brings people a lot of comfort and insight, especially when they're going through difficulties, it seems. And I think during this time more than ever, I think we need books like this to help us to navigate what can be a scary world at times. And so I have included Harry Potter on this list. So that is my top 10. Again, you may or may not like that top 10, but that's my top 10. Let me know what you think, what your thoughts are. I would love to hear them. Anyway, put in the comments below, like and subscribe, and I'll talk to you all next time.